Let's Talk on Talk Radio Europe with Steve Gilmour.
Right, it's that time that I've been billing up all morning. If you were listening yesterday, you've heard me speak to Jeremy Cook about the possibility that within 30 years we could be trading freshwater as a valuable commodity. We're going to go over to a finance expert who I used to get onto my evening show on a regular basis, and I know Richie's had him on the evenings as well a couple of times. He's someone who speaks finance in plain English, and he's on the other end of the line now. Jonathan Davis from Jonathan Davis Finance. Good morning. Welcome back, Jonathan. How are you doing this morning?
I'm very well, Steve. Hopefully plain English with a Scottish accent.
Well, yeah, as plain English as you and I can be. Right, now, Jonathan, obviously your own background is your own company's Jonathan Davis Wealth Management. Just to tell people a little bit about you. You're a frequent commentator on most of the television channels and the radio channels on finance, stock markets, personal finance, etc., etc. We had a brief chat yesterday afternoon, and I want to talk about something that we both saw on a news channel the other night, and this is about fresh water being traded as a commodity.
Yes, and what this essentially means is that the global investment banks are going to be setting up what are called options, where you can buy into freshwater and then sell contracts in freshwater in the future, or indeed you can sell what you don't own. It's called sell short, and then your aim would be to buy back in the future at hopefully lower prices. That's what they're going to be setting up, and we see very senior people in global banking saying that in 20 or 30 years' time, that this could result in ultimately, and this is the ugly thing and crazy thing, the global banks could own all the fresh water on the planet.
Right.
And we need to put that into perspective, because although 70% of our planet is water, only 3% of the water is water that we can actually drink.
No.
So it's extremely important to us.
This is incredible. You have a lot of people looking at the radio and saying, "What? what do you mean the banks will own it? That's not possible."
It's entirely possible, and I'll give you a real life current example. Because of all the reckless lending to countries, and let's focus on Greece for now. Everyone knows that Greece is in the mire. Because of all that, the way the Greeks are going to try and get themselves out of this debt is they're going to privatize their assets. They're going to sell off their assets. Now, think about what their assets are. Their assets are their land and their buildings, and maybe their fishing rights. What about their ancient buildings, the Acropolis, etc., and all their art treasures, and their railways and their roads to make toll roads? All these things are going to be sold off, and because they are selling at distressed prices, because they're clearly a willing seller, the banks are going to buy at very low prices. So ultimately, the banks are going to own most of Greece. And if I'd said that on the radio a few years ago, the banks in a few years are going to own most of Greece, people, understandably, would have looked at the radio as you said, and thought that guy's crazy. But that's exactly what's happening. And unfortunately, this derivatives market, as we call it, that's going to be created in fresh water, it means that, let's say, for example, Scotland, the United Kingdom has got lots of fresh water in Scotland. What if people started buying and selling options, contracts to buy or sell Loch Lomond, the water in Loch Lomond, which I believe is fresh water? Eventually, what if we've got so many debts that we have to sell that off? And there is a prime example of how it could happen, that they could take over all the water on the planet.
Right, okay, so you're looking at if a country really only gets into serious financial trouble. I mean, let's take Russia for example. Russia has the largest amount of fresh water they have one lake, which is the largest single point of fresh water in the world.
Yeah.
Now, Russia yesterday announced a huge privatization plan, I think that the biggest that has ever been seen, which is going to generate a huge amount of billions into the government's coffers. So Russia looks quite secure. It's very unlikely that Russia, over the next 20 years, are going to see themselves fall into such serious debt that they're going to fall prey to this.
And I would argue, I could see it happening. As far as I'm concerned, Russia is a corrupt country. It's full of oligopolies, in other words, groups of extremely important, powerful, wealthy people who own the vast majority of the wealth in Russia. I could definitely see that lake that you mentioned being ring-fenced, sold off by the government to the banks. I could see Russia imploding economically. I mean, if the global economy is as weak as I believe that it is, then the global oil price, which basically sustains Russia, because Russia is the largest producer of oil in the world. People think Saudi Arabia, it's actually Russia. Then the Russian economy would collapse. It would literally collapse. And there is a very reasonable, not forecast, but way that Russia would indeed sell off all its water to the banks.
Right, now again there's going to be people sitting saying it's just not going to happen. You know, we'll sort out something where we can sanitize the water that we have, and we can rejuvenate what's there and all the rest. But just to give some people some facts, pollution is also causing a problem in the clean water that we have. So we've got in the Gulf Coast in the US, there's fertilizer runoff, which is polluting the waters there. In the California to Maryland, where they are drilling, there is an additive called MTBE. It's called methyl tertiary butyl, sounds like somewhere in Wales. MTBE, an additive in ordinary gas, which can already be found in fresh well water from California to Mexico. So the fresh water that we do have is being polluted by industry as we speak, which is then, and we've already got problems in China, Egypt, India, Israel, Pakistan, Mexico. We know parts of Africa, and the United States. In the United States, there's water shortages already in Colorado, California, Las Vegas, and the East Coast. That's what, we don't see this, Jonathan, do we? The newspapers, the main media, they don't talk about it because they don't want you to know. They don't want to scare you.
Well, first of all, I want to say it's truly amazing to hear you state the facts to your audience, because, as you say, people would be amazed to hear these kind of facts. But, your audience just put it entirely into context. When, if they're thinking, there's no real water shortage. Excuse me, I live and work in the southeast of England. Where there is loads of rain. It's raining right now. It's probably not raining where you are, but it's pouring with rain. I'm looking at the window right now. And yet, isn't it the case that practically every year we get water shortages? So you're absolutely correct. And the bigger, wider context is that during the 20th century, and frankly, I'm no big eco warrior or anything at all like that. I don't really know whether or not we've got global warming or not, but it is a fact. Anyone can know we raped the planet in the 20th century of resources, and the pollution you mentioned all over the place. We're raping the planet, and we've got billions of people on the planet now. Only 100 years ago, we had a quarter of that population. Well, there comes a point when there's more resources being taken out than we're actually preserving. So, hence, yes, there are great problems. And with regards to water, you can see with more mouths to quench of thirst, and with the pollution that's happening, and because we're not investing in sort of, for example, desalination of seawater to freshwater, we're not investing in transportation of water by pipes. Interestingly, we'll invest in transportation of oil, but we won't invest in transportation of water. Fascinating, don't you think?
Incredible.
So yes, unfortunately, we can see how a powerful group of global investors could indeed take over all the world's water.
And again, it's just that final sentence of yours is a terrifying thought, because already, and again, this is something you have to go and look for, the information. Everything that we're talking about here today with Jonathan Davis is there if you take the time to go and look for the information. Okay, that's what a lot of problem. People just don't do that.
And that's a really important point, and it also follows on from what you were saying just before that. It's not in the mainstream media, but and as you said, because there are forces out there who don't want people to know that there are major problems. Economically, we've got the biggest problem on earth. I mean, we've got global economic catastrophe around the corner, and I know that your listeners will be saying, "Oh, well, that guy's way out there." But excuse me, I'd ask those people who are thinking that. Did anyone say we were about to have global economic catastrophe just after 2007? Well, people like me did, actually.
Well, we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about that in a few minutes, and talk about some of the stuff you and I used to talk about at night time in a few minutes' time. But the point I just want to reiterate again, before we move off the water, is that already in the Pentagon there are reports and recommendations being made by the chiefs of staff that this is going to be a security issue over the coming years, and this is going to be a problem, potentially a world peace issue, because as water becomes more scarce and people start to die of this issue, which we're already seeing every single day. Just switch on the news tonight, you'll see it over in the east of Africa, and it's been going on for years. But as this problem starts to become bigger in the countries that I rhymed off earlier on, there's a security issue starting to build up as well.
I read a paper just a couple of weeks ago that apparently there is an important document within MI5 which says that they have to prepare for anarchy after 4 missing meals. What I mean by that is apparently MI5 have prepared for, if something went wrong with our food system, that if we as a population missed 4 meals in a row, there would be literal anarchy. There is clearly a major problem of resources across the world. And you mentioned those poor Africans who are literally starving to death right now. And the mainstream media says, "Oh, isn't it a pity, but it's a shame there was nothing we could do about it." And that could not be further from the truth. The reason why those people are in that state is not because of political corruption in their countries, which is insinuated, although I suspect there probably is quite a lot of that. That's not the main reason. The main reason is because their food costs has gone up 270% in the last year. Now, I don't know about you, but never mind them. I'd find it difficult financially if my food costs practically trebled in a year. And certainly the majority of the British public would find that extremely difficult. Our inflation would jump to 20% overall. And with wages not rising, well, you can imagine how difficult that would be. But if you're already spending half of your income just on food alone, and then the food nearly trebles, well, clearly you're literally wiped out. And the reason why food has gone up like that is because of, we go back to global bankers. And I'm sounding like a revolutionary here or a conspiracy theorist. Actually, I'm a capitalist. But what we don't have is capitalism in global finance. Because capitalism would say that if you're bust, you're let go bust. But instead, the global politicians a couple of years ago decided to borrow literally fantastic sums of money from the banks to give it to the banks to bail them out. Hence, we have global inflation because currencies went through the floor because of all this money printing. And when currencies go through the floor, then the price of goods goes through the stratosphere. And that is unfortunately what happened to food and therefore to the Africans. We have a great problem of global economics right now, and that is the main issue that people need to get to grips with. You're based in Spain, and we all know about the economic problems of Spain. Indeed, Zapatero had to cancel his holiday yesterday, didn't he?
That's right.
Because he needed to check on what's happening to secure the country. Well, if only he'd been doing that in the last 10 years, maybe the country wouldn't have gone bankrupt. But it went bankrupt because of reckless lending, because of reckless borrowing, not just by the government, but also by households. And that's why we're in the state we're in. Countries are literally going bankrupt.
Right, now listen, right now, there's people listening at the moment thinking, that's Steve off in his nighttime stuff again. That's him being alarmist again. I just want to remind some people of a couple of facts here. You and I spoke 18 months ago on my nighttime show, and we discussed the fact that the US was bankrupt.
Yeah.
And look what happened over the last 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm. And this political... You're absolutely correct, of course. We have been talking about these things in advance of them happening and people thinking we're crazy. I've been in the media in the United Kingdom for about the last 6 or 7 years, saying about the problems that we were creating and that what would evolve. And of course, people were literally laughing at me. They certainly after the 2008, the biggest global economic and financial collapse in history, people stopped laughing at me. But they now think I'm still a bit weird because, after all, it's all sorted. Well, it isn't sorted. It's anything but. In 2009, as I said a few moments ago, the governments did not sort the problem. What they did was compound the problem by adding vast amounts of more debt onto already a mountain of debt. Going back to the United States, it's been an absolute farce, the political shenanigans of the Republicans and the Democrats and everyone trying to say we're working for the American people. No, they're not. They have just signed off extra borrowings of $2.5 trillion. Add that to the $12 trillion that they already had of debt, and then you could add on also liabilities that the government have to pay pensions and Social Security and whatever, and you're talking literally fantastically gargantuan sums of money. And who is it that's got to pay this debt? The taxpayers.
You and I.
Well, excuse me?
You and I.
You and I and your listeners. And whatever scale you're looking at, whether you're looking at the vast scale of the United States or a scale of the fifth of the size of the United Kingdom, or smaller again, Spain or Greece, in relative terms, it's all vast. And, there comes a point when there are no more taxpayers to service the debt. Let's focus on the United Kingdom, because I know that many of your listeners are British, although they may not live here, so they'll have some understanding. We have a vast amount of debt by the government, about £800 billion. We have an economy that's about 1.2 trillion. So you think, well, that doesn't seem a bit of a problem. Well, £800 billion is a stated debt, but on that you have to add on all the borrowings we took on to get the new roads in the last 10 years, the private finance initiative and the hospitals, and add on also, again, like I said earlier, all the pension liabilities for which there's no fund, but there's lots of public sector staff who have to be paid a pension, as well, of course, old age pensions. And you're talking, in fact, you're talking £5 trillion of debt. Now, our government receives revenue of taxes and whatever of about £550 billion. In other words, our government, the United Kingdom government, has debts of nearly 10 times its income. Now, you just think of a household where they've got debts, mortgages, credit card, hire purchase, you name it,
you're done.
Of 10 times their income. Well, it's unsustainable.
That's it. You're done. You're finished. Now, before there's something else that I would like you to do for my listeners. It's something you've done before, again, in the evenings. The banking system. I was talking 20 minutes ago about what a fantastic situation it is to be an investment bank, because it's like going to the casino, and the casino will always cover your losses. Doesn't matter what you bet on. It doesn't matter. You're going to get bailed out if you make a bad investment. But can you just go through the basic banking system for my listeners? You know, how it works and how they've got themselves into this situation.
Absolutely. It actually starts in the 1930s when, after, of course, the United States and most of the developed world had, by then, the biggest depression in recorded economic history, obviously. The United States signed off an act of Parliament called the Glass-Steagall Act, named after the senators Glass and Steagall, which separated the what we might term the casino banks, the investment banks in Wall Street, in the City of London, Canary Wharf, and etc., from the high street banks, because that was deemed to have been one of the root causes of the 1930s depression, because with having the high street banks as part of the same banking system or companies as the investment banks were using normal retail customers' money to speculate, should I say, on the markets. So they split the high street banks from the investment banks. And on the very last day of Bill Clinton's presidency, he signed a repeal of the Glass-Steagall Act. And I can't remember exactly, what would that be, 1999, I think it was, 1998, 99. And that meant, therefore, that Wall Street was able to buy up the high street banks. Thus, they were able to use retail customers' funds to speculate on the market. Now, think about this. It's only 12 years ago. Now, I have to say that they did it because Thatcher did it first. A Big Bang, many people remember the phrase Big Bang, I think it was 1986, was when investment banks were able to buy high street banks. Barclays had investment and high street. HSBC's got a big investment. Royal Bank of Scotland, big investment, and NatWest, so on. So they became all part of the same groups. The issue is that if an investment bank owns a high street bank, they write into the deal that they can't go bust. Because if they go bust, it's going to affect depositors. Well, actually, that in itself is balderdash, but that's what the politicians were convinced of. So in the space of just 12 years, or less even, from when Clinton signed the repeal of the Glass-Steagall Act, Wall Street went on a spree of investing, speculating, and all along for many years made vast profits until they stopped making profits. In fact, they made vast losses. And because it was in the deal, the governments had to step in and bail them out. And what we need now is a reinstatement of Glass-Steagall. We need to separate the high street from Wall Street. That's what absolutely we need to do. We need to do it as soon as possible.
Right, so they've ruined the banking system.
Yep.
They've been bailed out by you and I.
Yep.
And it's just continuing, and it's going to happen again.
It is continuing, and the most simple way of showing the continuation of you're being supported by the casino owner, as it were, is the global interest rates are 0.5%. Okay, in Europe they're 1.25%, but they're extremely low in the Anglo-American countries. In Japan, they're about 0.5%, which means that the banks can borrow from the Bank of England or the US Federal Reserve at 0.5%, but then they lend it to you and me at 5%, 6%, or if you're a small business, 10%. Now, it's not just a simple case of they borrow £100 and they lend £100. No, they borrow £100, they lend £2,000. They lend 20 times at least what they've borrowed. Anyone can do the math. If you're borrowing £100 at 0.5%, you're paying, 50 pence a year interest. If you're lending £2,000 at 5% for 50 pence interest, you're making £100. That is supported by governments. It's an absolute travesty, and the taxpayers are paying for it.
Well, Jonathan, you've given people a lot to think about. Just one thing I just want to say, and this is what people also forget. Look back through history. Every single time people have had enough or people have lost enough, they fight back. And if the banks and the governments are not careful, it could happen so quickly. So quickly. Just look at what happened in Germany in the 1930s. Look at what's happening in Greece right now. It can happen in the blink of an eye. And people who think, oh no, it's never going to happen, be careful.
People need to realise, that there are serious global economic problems, and to characterise how serious, it is a simple fact that governments in the West are going bankrupt as you and I speak. Now, that is not within living memory, certainly not since the Second World War, although it's happened throughout history. Until they go bankrupt, or when they go bankrupt, should I say, what happens? There is a major fall in the standard of living of the ordinary people.
Jonathan, I'm going to have to leave it there. Okay, listen, thank you for joining. If you want more, Jonathan Davis, he's on the internet. Just look him up, Jonathan Davis. Okay, Jonathan, thank you very much indeed. Stay there.
All the best, Dave. Bye-bye.